The paper was already signed. Not by Maurice. By her son. She found it on a Tuesday morning, tucked beneath a routine envelope her assistant had left on the long oak table, the one her late husband had picked out, the one that still smelled faintly like him when the heat came through the windows. The document had her name on it 17 times. None of those times had she been asked. Temporary financial guardianship request. She read it once, then again. Then she set it down and looked at her hands, the same hands that had built 3 companies, buried a husband, and raised a boy she once rocked to sleep during thunderstorms because he was afraid of the dark. That boy was now trying to take everything she had left. The front door opened. Kieran walked in wearing a suit she didn't recognize. Behind him, a woman with a clipboard and a man who wouldn't look Maurice in the eye. He kissed her cheek. Cold, rehearsed, done. Mom, his voice was soft, careful. The voice he used when he wanted something. We need to talk about your future. Maurice didn't move. Whose idea was this? She asked. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her like this was a business meeting, like she was a stranger, like 68 years of her life hadn't built the very floor beneath his feet. You've been under so much stress, he said, since Dad passed. You're not yourself. She looked at him, not with anger, with something worse. Recognition. Because she had seen this before, not with Kieran, with other men who smiled while they moved pieces behind your back, men who called it help when they meant control. I'm not confused, she said quietly. Nobody said you were. He slid the document closer to her. This is just protection. She looked down at the paper. Then she looked back at her son. And in that moment, something in her chest didn't break. It locked. Because she knew something Kieran didn't. Her husband hadn't just left her money. He had left her a trap. And her son had just walked into it. Stay with me, because what Maurice does next will change everything. If this story is gripping you already, subscribe. The next story will hit even harder. She tried to send a donation. $40,000. To the children's hospital she had funded for 11 years. The same one that had a wing with her husband's name on it. The same one that sent her a card every Christmas signed by kids who had survived things that should have killed them. Denied. Not delayed, not pending. Denied. The screen said, account flagged for verification review. Maurice sat very still. She tried again. Denied. She picked up the phone and called her financial advisor, a man named Cord who had worked beside her for 14 years, who had been at her husband's funeral, who had held her hand at the burial. He answered on the 4th ring. Cord, she said, what is happening to my accounts? A pause, not a short one. Mrs. Ellwood. His voice was different, flatter, like someone reading from a card. There's been a temporary hold placed for estate continuity purposes. By whom? Another pause. I'm not at liberty. She hung up. Not from anger. From understanding. Because Cord had never once in 14 years said the words not at liberty to her. He had told her things husbands hide from wives. Things boards hide from shareholders. He had never once protected someone else's secret from her. Until today. She walked to the far end of the room. Outside, a delivery truck moved slowly down the street. A woman pushed a stroller. Two pigeons fought over something small on the pavement. The world didn't know. Nobody knew that a 71-year-old woman was standing in her own home, locked out of her own money by her own son. She thought about the night Kieran was born. 36 hours of labor. She hadn't screamed once. Not because it didn't hurt. Because she had decided, even then, that pain didn't get to be louder than her. She turned back into the room, walked to her desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a phone she hadn't used in over a year, a private line. One number saved. She dialed. Rhett Klein picked up before the second ring. "He's already moved on the accounts," she said. Rhett didn't gasp, didn't stumble. He said, then he just made his first mistake. Maurice exhaled once. "Tell me about the clause," she said. What Rhett tells her next, nobody saw coming, not even Kieran. Rhett said 6 words. And those 6 words cracked something open inside her that no legal document ever could. Someone has been preparing for your incapacity. Not planning. Not suggesting. Preparing. Like it was already decided. Like the ending had been written and all that was left was making her fit inside it. Maurice didn't speak for a long moment. Outside, the afternoon light was cutting through the blinds in thin strips. She watched one fall across the desk. Across her husband's initials carved into the corner of it. Something he did quietly one afternoon, years ago, when he thought she wasn't watching. She had never told him she saw. Now she pressed her fingers to those letters. "How long?" she asked. 7 months, Rhett said, maybe more. 7 months ago, she had been at a charity dinner in Newport. She had given a speech. She had laughed. She had worn the blue dress Kieran once said made her look like herself again. 7 months ago, her son had already started building a cage around her. While she was laughing, "There's a secondary advisory board," Rhett continued, "activated without your signature. They used a sub-clause from the 2019 estate amendment, the one filed 3 weeks after your husband's diagnosis." Maurice closed her eyes. The 2019 amendment. She remembered signing it, a Tuesday. Rain against the windows. Her husband had been tired that day, more than usual, and she had signed quickly because she didn't want him to wait. She had never read the sub-clauses. She had trusted the people around her to protect what he built. One of those people had used that trust as a door. "There's more," Rhett said. She opened her eyes. "The clause allows emergency governance transfer," he said carefully. "If 2 board members and 1 family member declare emotional instability concerns." The room went very quiet. "Kieran," she said. "He filed the declaration 4 days ago." 4 days ago, she had made him breakfast. Eggs, brown toast, the way he liked it since he was 9 years old. She had stood at that stove and made her son breakfast while he was already 4 days into removing her from everything she had ever built. She set the phone down for a moment. Not to cry. To breathe. Then she picked it back up. "Rhett," she said, "tell me exactly how my husband designed the override." Because what her dead husband built in secret. is about to become Kieran's worst nightmare. She poured him coffee the next morning, smiled when he walked in, asked about his drive, and while Kieran sat at her table drinking from her cup, talking about next steps and transition timelines, Maurice was recording every word. Not with a device, with something sharper. Memory. Because Rhett had told her something the night before that changed the entire shape of everything. The system doesn't need you to fight Maurice. It needs him to keep moving. So she let him move. Kieran had brought Selene this time. Selene sat with her legs crossed and a leather folder on her lap like she was already running board meetings in her head. She spoke in a soft voice that sounded like concern but landed like instruction. "We think reducing your public commitments would help," Selene said. "Less exposure, less pressure." "That makes sense," Maurice said. Kieran looked surprised for just a second, then relieved. That relief was the most painful thing she had seen in years, because it meant he had expected resistance. It meant he had prepared for a fight she wasn't going to give him. He thought she was folding. She was opening a door. After they left, she went to her private office and opened her laptop. A system she hadn't touched in years was now running quietly in the background. Rhett had reactivated it the night before. Her husband had called it the ledger. It didn't store money. It stored movement. Every access request, every approval bypass. Every time someone touched her financial architecture without her initiation, the ledger wrote it down, time-stamped. Sourced, sealed. She scrolled through the last 7 months. Page after page after page. Kieran's fingerprints were everywhere. Asset mapping, account queries, communication threads with board members she had personally appointed, private calls with Cord, her own advisor, going back to the spring. Spring. When she had been in the garden every morning. When she had finally started sleeping again after 2 years of grief. While she healed, her son had been harvesting. She sat back, didn't cry, looked at the ceiling, then looked back at the screen. And she did something that took everything she had. She smiled, because Kieran had just handed her the one thing she needed most. Proof. And he still has no idea. But in the next chapter, someone inside her own house is feeding him information in real time. You are exactly halfway through, and it only gets more intense from here. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this. The leak was coming from inside her own home. Not a hacker, not a board member, not Cord. Someone who had a key. Maurice found it at 11:47 at night, sitting alone with the ledger open on her screen. A data access point she almost scrolled past. Small, quiet, tucked between 2 larger entries like someone had tried to hide it inside noise. Her private calendar. Her medical appointments. Her daily schedule. All of it had been accessed, copied, forwarded. To a number she didn't recognize. She sat with that for a long time. Then she pulled up the household staff log, cross-referenced the timestamps, and stopped. The accesses happened every Tuesday and Friday morning, between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. The only person in her home between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. on Tuesdays and Fridays was a woman named Petra, her housekeeper. 11 years. A woman who knew where she kept her spare reading glasses, and how she liked her tea, and which photographs she couldn't walk past without slowing down. Maurice closed the laptop. Sat in the dark. She didn't feel anger. She felt something lonelier than that. Because betrayal from a son was devastating. But betrayal from someone who had watched her grieve, who had handed her tissues and made her soup and said he's at peace now, Mrs. Ellwood, that was a different kind of wound entirely. The next morning she said nothing to Petra. Watched her move through the kitchen, watched her wipe down the counter, watched her glance just once at Mari's phone on the table. That glance, that one small glance told her everything. That evening Mari's attended a family dinner Kieran had organized, a restaurant, private room, 3 other relatives she barely spoke to anymore, all wearing the same careful expression. Concern dressed as love. She sat through 2 hours of soft suggestions and gentle redirections and sentences that started with "we just think" and ended with "for your own good." Then the recording surfaced. Rhett sent it to her phone under the table. Kieran's voice, clear, calm, chilling. She won't see it coming until it's done. Maurice read the timestamp. He had said it yesterday. While she was making him coffee. While she was smiling. While she was letting him believe he was winning. She set the phone face down, picked up her glass, and smiled at her son across the table. He just scheduled the guardianship hearing, and he still doesn't know she's been ready since Chapter 1. The hearing date was set for a Thursday. Maurice found out on a Monday. Not from Kieran. From a court notification, letter delivered to her front door like she was a stranger being summoned. Like she was someone who needed to be told what was happening to her own life through an envelope with a government stamp on it. She held it for a long time standing in the doorway. The morning air was cold against her face. She didn't go back inside immediately. She just stood there, holding the letter, thinking about the Thursday mornings she used to spend with her husband, coffee on the back porch. No phones, no meetings, just the sound of birds and the weight of his hand on top of hers. Now Thursday meant a courtroom, and a son who had scheduled it without telling her. Inside, she called Rhett. He picked up immediately. "I know," he said before she spoke. "Tell me about the override," she said. "All of it, everything my husband built." Rhett was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant what came next mattered. "Your husband didn't build a will," Rhett said. "He built a system. The trust was never designed to pass to one person. It was designed to survive betrayal." Maurice sat down carefully. "He knew," she said. "Not a question." "He suspected," Rhett said carefully. "He told me once that wealth doesn't reveal character. It just removes the patience people need to hide who they already are." That sounded exactly like him. She pressed her fingers to her eyes. "The override clause," Rhett continued, "activates only under one condition: proven malicious intent by a direct beneficiary. Not suspected, proven, through documented action." And Kieran's actions have been documenting themselves since the moment he touched your accounts without authorization. Rhett paused. Every move he made, Maurice, every bypass, every board contact, Every access point, the ledger has it all. She breathed out. "But I need him to go further," she said. "Yes. I need him to walk into that hearing and make his case in front of witnesses." "Yes. And the moment he does, the trust activates automatically," Rhett said, "and there is nothing he can do to stop it." Mari stood, turned toward the light coming through the glass. Thursday was 4 days away. She had spent 40 years building things that lasted. 4 days was nothing. Kieran thinks he's walking into a courtroom. He has no idea he's walking into a trap his own father built. They won. Temporarily. That was the word the judge used, temporary authority review. Pending full hearing, pending evaluation, pending. But Kieran didn't hear pending. He heard victory. Mari's watched him in the hallway outside the courtroom. He didn't see her at first. He was talking to his lawyer, one hand on the man's shoulder, the other holding his phone. He was almost smiling. The kind of almost smile people wear when they are trying to look humble about something they are celebrating inside. Selene stood beside him. She was already on her phone. Already moving. Mari's watched them for exactly 11 seconds. Then she turned and walked the other way. That evening, the restrictions arrived. Not a conversation, not a call. A document delivered through her own legal portal, now partially controlled by the temporary authority review, informing her that all financial decisions above a certain threshold required dual authorization. Her signature alone was no longer enough. In her own estate, built with her own hands, she sat at the table and read the document 3 times. The clock on the wall sounded louder than it ever had. She thought about Kieran at 7 years old, standing at this same table, barely tall enough to see over the edge, asking her what all the papers meant. "It means we protect what we build," she had told him. He had nodded like he understood. He hadn't understood anything. She folded the document, set it down, and opened her laptop. Rhett had sent her a single message. 4 words. He just went further. She clicked the attachment. Kieran had submitted a request for full financial transition authorization. Not partial. Not temporary. Full. Everything. Within 72 hours. Mari's read it once. Closed the laptop. Sat in complete silence. Then she reached into the desk drawer and removed the black folder, the one her husband had left, the one she had touched only twice since his death. She opened it to the last page. At the bottom, in his handwriting, were 4 words she had read before but never needed. Until right now. When you are ready. She picked up her phone. Called Rhett. Activate it, she said. She just pulled a trigger her son doesn't know exists, and he has exactly 72 hours before everything collapses around him. The auditors arrived at 6 a.m. Not at Mari's home. At Kieran's office. She heard about it 40 minutes later when his lawyer called her legal team demanding an explanation. Demanding. Like they still had that option. Like the ground beneath them hadn't already started moving in a direction nobody on Kieran's side had planned for. Rhett called her at 6:52 a.m. "It's running," he said. That was all he needed to say. Maurice was already dressed, already seated at her desk. Cup of tea in front of her, warm this time. She had slept for the first time in weeks. Not because the hard part was over. Because she had finally stopped carrying it alone. The ledger had been submitted to 3 independent forensic teams simultaneously the moment she said activate, not filed. Not requested, submitted. Automatically, the way her husband had designed it. The way he had sat with lawyers she had never met, in rooms she had never entered, building a system that would only ever be needed if the worst happened. He had known. He had loved their son. And he had still known. That knowledge sat heavy in her chest as she drank her tea. Rhett arrived at 8. He placed a sealed folder on the table in front of her. She didn't open it immediately. "Tell me," she said. "Every unauthorized access," Rhett began. "Every board contact made without your initiation. Every asset query. Every communication between Kieran and Cord, between Selene and the secondary advisory board. The data transfer from inside your home." He paused. "All of it logged, all of it time-stamped. All of it verified by systems your husband paid to be independent from everyone, including you." Maurice looked at the papers in front of her. "He built it so I couldn't interfere with it either," she said quietly. "He built it so nobody could," Rhett said, "not even with your permission." She opened the folder then. Page after page of clean, precise, undeniable documentation. 7 months of her son's movements. 7 months of quiet theft dressed as concern. She turned to the last page. At the bottom was a single line her husband had written into the trust architecture years ago. "Betrayal does not require anger to be answered. It only requires proof." She closed the folder. Stood up. Tomorrow was the hearing. And for the first time since that document landed on her table, she was no longer the one being taken apart. Tomorrow Kieran walks into that courtroom believing he has already won. He has no idea what's waiting for him inside those walls. Kieran walked into that courtroom like a man who had already won. Shoulders back, jaw set. Lawyer beside him carrying a folder 3 inches thick. Selene 2 steps behind, wearing the kind of quiet expression people practice when they want to look like they are suffering for someone else's benefit. Maurice was already seated. She didn't look up when they walked in. She was looking at her hands. The same hands Kieran had held as a boy when he was sick, when he was scared. When the world felt too big and she was the only thing standing between him and it. She looked at those hands and said goodbye to something she couldn't name. The judge entered. Kieran's lawyer opened. The case was smooth, practiced, almost beautiful in the way a lie can be beautiful when someone has spent months polishing it. Cognitive concerns. Financial overextension, emotional instability following spousal loss. Every word carefully chosen, every pause deliberately placed. Selene dabbed her eye once. Maurice watched without expression. Then Rhett stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He simply placed a single document on the judge's desk and said, "Before this proceeds, the court needs to understand what it is actually looking at." The judge read for 40 seconds. The room changed. Not loudly. The way pressure changes before a storm. The way the air shifts before something breaks. Kieran's lawyer leaned over and whispered something. Kieran shook his head slightly. Confused, still not understanding. Then the forensic auditor was called forward. And for the next 11 minutes, 7 months of Kieran's movements were read aloud in a quiet courtroom in Boston. Every unauthorized access. Every bypassed approval. Every conversation with Cord. Every data transfer from inside Mari's home. The recorded conversation played through the room's speakers. She won't see it coming until it's done. Kieran's own voice, filling the space between them like smoke. Mari's didn't look at him. She looked at the light coming through the window. The same kind of light that had been in the room the morning he was born, when they had placed him in her arms and she had felt something she had no word for. Something permanent, something she believed nothing could touch. The judge set the documents down, removed his glasses, and said 4 words that made Selini's hand go still on the table. "I'm pausing these proceedings." The judge didn't rule that day. He didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. It's not over yet. What happens in the final chapter will break you and then put you back together. She gave it all away on a Friday. Not because she was forced. Not because she was broken. Because she chose to. The trust restructuring took 11 days after the hearing. 11 days of paperwork and signatures and legal architecture being dismantled and rebuilt into something her husband had always intended, but never lived to see completed. Independent generational foundations. 6 of them. Education, healthcare, housing, small business, legal aid, grief support. Every sector she had ever cared about. Every gap she had watched people fall into while the world looked away. Kieran received nothing. Not because Mari's was punishing him. Because the trust had already decided. The moment he triggered the malicious intent threshold, the inheritance clause voided automatically. Her husband had written it that way, clean, permanent, without room for appeals dressed as apologies. Kieran found out through his lawyer on a Wednesday morning. Mari's wasn't there when he found out. She was at the children's hospital, standing in the wing with her husband's name on it, watching a small boy in a blue gown walk slowly down the corridor, holding a nurse's hand. Taking steps like each one was a decision. Like the ground couldn't be trusted yet, but he was going to try anyway. She watched him until he made it to the end of the hall. Then she sat down and let herself cry for the first time since all of this began. Not from sadness, from release. That evening Kieran came to the house. Alone, no lawyer, no Selini. Just her son, standing in the doorway of the home he had grown up in, looking smaller than she had ever seen him look. Like something had been removed from him that he hadn't known was holding him up. He sat across from her at the table between them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then he asked the only question he had left. "Did you ever stop loving me?" Mari's looked at him, at the boy still living somewhere behind his eyes. "No," she said quietly. "But love was never what was missing between us." He looked at the table. "Trust," he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She stood, walked to the door, opened it. Outside, the evening light was gold and wide and endless. She stepped into it, and she didn't look back. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that make you feel something real. The next one is already waiting for you.